before I felt the touch of those cold, perfect hands on my skin, or lost myself in the darkness of those eyes that seemed to read my dirtiest secrets. I was just a girl trying to survive the overdue bills. But before I tell you how I sold my womb to the most powerful woman I have ever known, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel Forbidden Romances, because our goal is to reach 2,000 subscribers, and your help is fundamental for us to continue telling stories of love and redemption like mine. My name is Julia. I am 23 years old, and on that gray Monday morning, while the crowded bus rattled my bones and the rain beat against the fogged glass, I had no idea I was heading toward my destiny. I looked at my calloused hands, short fingernails without polish, thinking about how I would pay the rent for my studio apartment in the rough side of town, never imagining that in a few hours my life would turn upside down. I got off at the stop in front of the mirrored building where the Lumiere Clinic was located, feeling like an intruder in that neighborhood where even the air seemed cleaner and more expensive than in the rest of the city. My worn-out shoes made a shy sound against the white marble floor of the lobby, and I could feel the judgmental stares of the well-dressed people passing by me, exhaling imported perfumes. The receptionist, an impeccable woman who looked like she had never had a bad day in her life, looked me up and down before confirming my name on the exclusive appointment list. I was there to see Catherine, my distant cousin, a relative who had become a legend in the family, the woman who built an aesthetics empire and who never showed up for Thanksgiving or Christmas dinners. The panoramic elevator climbed to 40 floors in seconds, leaving my stomach churning. I do not know if from the speed or the nervousness that made my hands sweat cold. When the brushed steel doors opened, I was greeted by absolute silence and a soft smell of white tea and orchids, a fragrance that screamed luxury and control. I walked down the wide corridor, where abstract paintings decorated the immaculate walls, feeling small, a stain of imperfection in that temple consecrated to eternal beauty. Her personal secretary smiled with mechanical politeness and pointed to the double solid wood doors at the end of the hall, as if I were about to enter the throne room of a feared and solitary queen. Upon entering, the first thing I saw was her silhouette against the glass wall that went from the floor to the ceiling, observing the city down below as if she owned every building and every street. She did not turn around immediately, leaving me standing there, clutching my old purse against my chest like a useless shield against the aura of power that emanated from her. Catherine wore a black tailored suit that seemed to have been sculpted on her body, and her long black hair fell down her straight back like a cascade of perfectly aligned ink. I cleared my throat, trying to make some sound, but my voice died before being born, suffocated by the imposing presence of that 48-year-old woman who seemed to have stopped in time. It was then that she turned slowly, and the impact of seeing her face up close was like taking a punch to the stomach, stealing all the air from my lungs in a terrifying second. Catherine's face was a cold work of art, with pale skin without a single blemish, contrasting violently with full lips painted in an intense and dangerous blood red. Her eyes were black, deep, and almond-shaped, and they analyzed me with surgical precision, as if she could see through my cheap clothes and see my desperate soul. She was beautiful in a way that hurt, an untouchable and severe beauty that made my youth full of freckles and flaws look like a poorly made rough draft. "Sit down, Julia." Her voice was deep, velvety, and loaded with a natural authority that made my knees tremble before I could even obey the simple command. I approached the glass desk that separated us, feeling like a clumsy girl in front of a pagan goddess who exhaled power and that unforgettable woody perfume that would impregnate my memory. She did not smile, did not ask about the family, did not offer water. She just crossed her elegant legs and interlaced her fingers with long and perfectly manicured nails on the table. Catherine went straight to the point, throwing in my face the knowledge she had about my debts, my bad credit score, and the imminent eviction, as if she were reading a boring grocery list. "I have a proposal for you," she said, and her full lips moved hypnotically, pronouncing every syllable with a frightening clarity that echoed in the silent room. She explained that she built that empire alone, that she had everything money could buy, but that the biological clock was the only enemy she could not defeat with aesthetic treatments and discipline. Catherine wanted an heir, someone with her blood, but her body, that sacred and untouchable temple, could not carry a child due to ancient complications she did not detail. She needed a womb, a reliable vessel, someone with a blood tie, but who, above all, desperately needed financial salvation so as not to ask questions. The proposal was clear and brutal. I would be the surrogate. I would carry her child through insemination and, in exchange, I would have all my debts paid and a lifetime director position at the company. My mind spun, trying to process the madness and magnitude of it. The weight of lending my body, not for pleasure, but for the creation of a life that would not be mine. I looked at my trembling hands, and then at hers, firm and adorned with heavy gold rings, realizing the social abyss that existed between the two of us. "It is not a baby sale," she clarified quickly upon seeing my hesitation, anticipating my moral thoughts with sharp and manipulative intelligence. "It is an exchange of favors between distant cousins, a solid career opportunity in exchange for an act of family solidarity," she said, although her cold eyes showed no emotion or human warmth. It was a business contract, pure and simple, where my young and healthy uterus was the valuable asset, and my dignity was the price to be negotiated in that frozen room. Silence settled again, heavy and dense, while she awaited my answer with the patience of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere to run. I thought about the constant fear of having nowhere to live, the humiliation of counting coins to eat, and I looked again at that powerful woman who offered me salvation. For a brief moment I saw something beyond the wall of ice in Catherine's eyes, a tiny glimpse of a deep and painful desire to be a mother that she hid very well. Those perfect lips were slightly parted, betraying an anxiety she fought to hide under the impenetrable mask of the Iron Lady. I knew that accepting that would change my life forever, binding me to her by ties much more complex and intimate than a simple employment contract signed at a notary. "I accept." My voice came out hoarse, almost a failed whisper. But it was enough for a strange shine, perhaps of triumph, to light up deep in her gaze. Catherine stood up, walked around the table with soft steps, and stopped beside me, her physical presence so overwhelming that I felt the hair on my arm stand up instantly. She extended her hand to seal the deal, and when I touched her pale skin, I was shocked by the unreal softness, as if she were made of silk and not flesh and bone. The grip was firm, sealing our destiny, uniting the poor girl and the tycoon in a dangerous dance that would last 9 months, or perhaps a lifetime, without me knowing. "Tomorrow we start the clinical exams," she decreed, withdrawing her hand and returning to be the unreachable statue. But I still felt the strange heat of her touch on my sweaty palm. I left the room dazed, walking like a sleepwalker through the white corridors, feeling that I had just sold my soul, but without knowing exactly what the final price my heart would pay would be. The image of Catherine, with her black hair and striking red lips, was etched on my retina like a mental tattoo that I knew would never disappear, no matter how hard I tried. I did not imagine that that contract would be just the beginning of a free fall toward forbidden feelings that I did not have permission to feel for my cousin. In that moment, I was just the poor relative serving as an instrument, but something told me that biology and destiny had much crueler and more intense plans for the two of us in the months to come. The sound of the fountain pen scratching the thick paper echoed in the meeting room as if it were the noise of a sentence being decreed by an invisible judge. I held the heavy writing instrument, a black and gold piece that probably cost more than all the furniture in my house combined, feeling the cold metal against my sweaty fingers. Before me, a stack of documents awaited my signature, pages and more pages of clauses that defined the destiny of my body for the next 9 months. Catherine was sitting at the head of the table, observing my every move with those eagle eyes, ensuring I did not falter at the decisive moment. Beside her, two lawyers in suits maintained a respectful silence, treating the situation with the seriousness of a billion-dollar corporate merger, and not like the conception of a human life. I read the small print with my heart racing, feeling a lump in my throat with every prohibition I found in the legal text, drafted to protect my cousin's investment. There were restrictions on what I could eat, drink, where I could go, and even who I could associate with during the pregnancy period. It was as if, from that signature on, I ceased to be Julia, the free woman, to become a property of the Lumiere Clinic, a luxury vessel rented temporarily. The term surrogate mother appeared repeatedly, a soft legal terminology to mask the brutal commercial transaction we were conducting there, under the freezing air conditioning. I looked at Catherine in search of some sign of humanity, but she just drummed her perfect nails on the table, impatient with my delay in accepting the chains she offered me. I signed my full name on the last sheet, feeling like I was selling a piece of my soul in exchange for the financial freedom I dreamed of so much. The moment I lifted the pen, one of the lawyers collected the papers quickly, putting them in a leather briefcase as if they were state secrets. Catherine let out an almost imperceptible sigh, relaxing the rigid posture of her shoulders for the first time on that tense morning. "It is done," she said, with the deep voice that caused shivers down my spine, pushing a second contract in my direction, this one much simpler and direct. It was my appointment as assistant director, the facade position that would justify the monthly payments and the radical change in my standard of living before society and family. That second paper was the candy that disguised the bitter taste of the medicine, the promise of a future where I would never again have to choose between paying the electricity or buying groceries. I signed too, feeling a dizzying mixture of gratitude and shame, as if I were receiving a golden handout from a benevolent and cruel queen. Catherine stood up immediately, signaling that the bureaucratic part was over, and that now the real work needed to start without delays. "Let's go to the medical wing," she ordered, without waiting for me, walking with her stiletto heels clicking on the floor with authority. I followed her like an obedient shadow, leaving behind the meeting room and entering the pulsing heart of the aesthetic empire she commanded with an iron fist. The medical wing of the clinic was even more intimidating than the office, a labyrinth of immaculate white and state-of-the-art machines that hummed softly. I was greeted by a team of doctors who treated Catherine with almost religious reverence, calling her ma'am every 2 words. They looked at me not as a patient, but as a cog that needed to be inspected and calibrated to function perfectly. I had to wear a thin hospital gown, stripping off my old clothes and becoming exposed to the cold of the room and the clinical stares surrounding me. Catherine remained in the room during the initial exams, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, supervising the blood collection as if she were checking inventory. I felt the prick of the needle in my arm and saw my blood filling the test tubes, a vivid red that contrasted with the morbid paleness of that sterile environment. Catherine watched the flow of the vital liquid with a morbid interest, her red lips slightly parted, as if that blood were the guarantee of the continuity of her legacy. She did not hold my hand, did not ask if I was okay, did not offer a glass of water. She just monitored the efficiency of the process. I felt invaded, exposed in my vulnerability, realizing that for her, I was nothing more than a means to an end, a hand-picked biological incubator. Her coldness was fascinating and terrifying at the same time, and I caught myself wondering what it would take to melt that layer of ice that wrapped around her heart. After the battery of exams, the chief doctor explained the next steps of fertilization, talking about hormones, cycles, and dates with a naturalness that made me dizzy. Catherine asked technical questions, demonstrating deep knowledge about the procedure, treating my uterus as if it were a branch of the company needing efficient management. I remained silent, nodding when necessary, feeling less and less the owner of my own body and more an employee of her desire. She scheduled the start of the hormonal treatment for the following week, without consulting me about my availability, assuming that my time now belonged exclusively to her. And, in a way, it really did, because the contract I had just signed tied me to her in every possible way. When I was finally released to get dressed, my hands were trembling so much that I had trouble buttoning my worn-out blouse. Catherine was waiting for me in the hallway, typing something on her state-of-the-art cell phone, the impenetrable expression as always. "Your driver will take you home to get your things," she said, without taking her eyes off the illuminated screen, as if she were dispatching a package. I stopped, confused, not understanding exactly what she meant by getting my things at that time of day. "You are moving in tonight," she completed, finally looking up and staring at me with that black intensity that paralyzed me. "The contract requires constant monitoring and a stress-free environment," she explained, as if it were obvious that I could not continue living in my noisy and dangerous neighborhood. I tried to argue, to say that I needed time to organize my life, notify the landlord, but she raised a hand asking for silence. "Everything has already been resolved. Your debts were paid 10 minutes ago, and the lease termination fee has already been paid," she informed with the frightening efficiency of someone who controls the world. I had no choice. I never did from the moment I answered her phone call. I was being absorbed by the black hole of Catherine's existence. The idea of living under the same roof as her, in that mansion that I imagined to be as cold as its owner, made my stomach turn with anxiety. I left the clinic feeling the afternoon sun on my face, but the heat could not dissipate the cold that had settled in my bones after that morning. The black armored car was waiting for me at the door, a luxurious vehicle that looked like a spaceship compared to the bus I used to take. The driver, a large and silent man, opened the door for me, and I entered that world of leather and silence, leaving my old life on the sidewalk. As the car glided through the city streets, I observed ordinary people living their normal lives, and felt a sudden envy of their freedom. I was now a prisoner of luxury, sold out of necessity, walking into the golden cage of my rich cousin. I arrived at my small apartment and began packing my life into 2 old and worn suitcases, feeling a deep melancholy looking at the peeling walls that had been my home. Every object I packed seemed like a piece of me I was leaving behind, an identity being erased to make room for Madame Catherine's surrogate. The simple clothes, the secondhand books, the faded family photos, everything seemed inadequate for the new setting where I would live. I wondered if there would be room for my colorful mess in her monochromatic and perfect life. The fear of the unknown squeezed my chest, mixed with a dangerous curiosity about what the nights would be like in that mansion. When I zipped up the last suitcase, my cell phone vibrated with a message from her, short and direct, without greetings or affectionate goodbyes. "The driver is waiting. Do not be late for dinner. We have rules to discuss." I read those words and took a deep breath, trying to gather all the courage I had left to face the beast in her own lair. I was about to enter Catherine's intimacy, see what she did when the clinic lights went out and the social mask fell. I grabbed my suitcases, took one last look at my poor past, and closed the door, ready to surrender to the uncertain fate awaiting me at the house of the most powerful and lonely woman I had ever known. The massive iron gates of Catherine's estate opened slowly, revealing a white stone path illuminated by lights embedded in the ground, guiding the car like a runway. The house did not look like a home, but rather a monument of concrete and glass, a modern fortress designed to keep the world out and preserve the silence within. The garden was meticulously pruned, without a leaf out of place, with sculptural trees that seemed never to have felt the touch of a disorderly wind. As we got out of the car, the night air seemed thinner there, far from the pollution and noise of my neighborhood, carried only by the distant sound of a minimalist water fountain. I gripped the handle of my old suitcase tightly, feeling shame heat up my face, noticing the contrast between the worn fabric of my luggage and the grandeur of that triumphant entrance. The main door, a gigantic structure of dark wood, was opened by a housekeeper in an impeccable gray uniform who did not smile, only tilted her head in a silent and efficient greeting. I entered the entrance hall and was immediately swallowed by a sepulchral silence, broken only by the echo of my own steps on the marble floor that shone like a mirror of water. The ceiling was extremely high, and a modern crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling like a cascade of frozen diamonds, spreading a cold and diffuse light through the environment. There were no family photos, trinkets, or any sign of personal life on the side tables. Everything was magazine decor, beautiful to look at, but forbidden to touch. I felt like a dirty intruder entering a sacred temple, afraid that my simple presence could stain the immaculate perfection of that aesthetic sanctuary. The housekeeper, who introduced herself only as Matilda, indicated with a dry gesture that I should follow her up the floating glass staircase that led to the second floor. Climbing those transparent steps gave me vertigo, a physical sensation of stepping into the void, suspended in the air without any safety net to catch me if I fell. The upper corridor was long and decorated with abstract works of art in shades of black and white, reinforcing the monochromatic color palette Catherine seemed to adore. Matilda opened the Miba third-on door on the left and announced that this would be my room for the next few months, handing me an electronic key before disappearing down the hall like a ghost. I entered the room and lost my breath. It was bigger than my entire old apartment, with an entire wall of glass overlooking the illuminated pool in the backyard. The bed was immense, covered with Egyptian cotton sheets so white they hurt the eyes, and there were so many pillows I wouldn't know where to put my head. I placed my suitcase on a futuristic design armchair, afraid of dirtying the fluffy cream-colored rug that seemed never to have been stepped on by ordinary shoes. The closet was a separate room, empty and waiting to be filled, but my few clothes would look ridiculous, hanging on those LED-lit racks. I sat on the edge of the bed, testing the mattress that embraced my body with a dangerous softness, and felt a wave of loneliness hit my chest hard. I was in absolute luxury, surrounded by comfort, but I had never felt so helpless and far from myself as in that moment. I decided to take a shower to wash away the day's tension, entering a bathroom that looked like a private spa, with Carrara marble finishes and gold faucets. The mirror covered the entire wall, forcing me to face my naked and imperfect body under a harsh light that hid nothing, neither the freckles nor the small scars of life. While the hot water fell over my shoulders, I used the bath products that were there, unlabeled glass bottles that smelled of rosemary and mint, the scent of aseptic wealth. I tried to relax, but my mind wouldn't stop thinking about Catherine, about where she was in that huge house, if she could hear me, if she was monitoring my shower through some hidden camera. The paranoia of being watched property began to set in, transforming the pleasure of the hot bath into a mandatory hygiene task. I put on comfortable clothes, the best I had, but which still looked like an old rag compared to the fluffy towel I had just used. Someone knocked lightly on the door, and my heart raced, thinking it was her, but it was just Matilda announcing that dinner would be served in 15 free-done minutes. I went down the stairs carefully, guided by the soft smell of food coming from somewhere, an aroma that reminded me nothing of the fried foods and strong spices of my neighborhood. The dining room was dominated by a long black wood table, where only autumnal places were set, one at each end, separated by a vast desert of polished surface. Catherine was already there, sitting at the head, typing on a tablet and drinking a glass of sparkling water, without seeming to notice my shy arrival. "Good evening," I murmured, my voice sounding small in that cavernous space, and she finally looked up, turning off the device screen with a slow movement. "Sit down, Julia," she ordered, indicating the chair at the other end, maintaining the physical distance that symbolized the abyss between us. Dinner was served in silence by Matilda, porcelain plates containing small and artistically assembled portions of grilled fish and steamed organic vegetables. There was no salt. There was no fat. Just the pure and bland taste of extreme health that she imposed as law. Catherine ate with mechanical elegance, cutting the fish into tiny pieces and chewing, slowly, while her black eyes traveled from my plate to my face, assessing if I was nourishing myself adequately. "We need to establish some rules of cohabitation," she said suddenly, her voice cutting the silence like a sharp knife on crystal. She wiped her lips with a linen napkin and began listing the house norms. Absolute silence after 10 p.m. No outside visitors without prior authorization. Total ban on processed foods or sugar. I listened to everything, nodding, feeling the food stick in my throat, realizing that my freedom had been sold along with my womb. She spoke about the exercise routine, the lymphatic drainage sessions I would do at the clinic, and the importance of keeping my emotional state neutral so as not to affect the fetus. I was not a guest, nor a cousin. I was a high-level employee, hosted at the company headquarters for a confidential project. "Did you understand everything?" she asked, tilting her head slightly to the side, and the light from the chandelier reflected in her black hair, creating an almost divine halo around her. "Yes, Catherine, I understood," I replied, trying to keep my voice firm, but inside I wanted to scream and run back to my noisy and dirty apartment. She seemed satisfied with my submission and went back to drinking her water. The subject closed as quickly as it began. Silence reigned again, but now it was a silence loaded with tension, where every breath of mine seemed too loud and inappropriate. I looked at her, observing the perfect line of her jaw, the skin that looked like porcelain, and wondered if she felt anything, if there was a heart beating beneath that cold silk. We finished dinner, and she stood up, smoothing the clothes that had no wrinkles, and wished me a dry good night before retiring to her office. I was left alone at the huge table, surrounded by dirty dishes and the emptiness of that mansion that seemed to suck the joy out of anyone who entered. I went up to my room feeling the weight of that first night, the fear of the future, and the strangeness of living someone else's life. I lay on the soft bed, but sleep would not come. My eyes scanned the shadows of the unknown room, transforming furniture into monsters and the silence into a threat. The mattress was too comfortable, the pillow too soft. Everything was too perfect to be real, and this caused me terrible anxiety. I tossed and turned in bed for hours, listening to the natural creaks of the house, the hum of the air conditioning, trying to find a position where I felt like myself again. It was then that I heard a sound coming from the hallway, slow and rhythmic steps that stopped exactly in front of my closed door. I held my breath, heart beating in my throat, imagining Catherine standing there on the other side, with her ear against the wood, watching my sleep. The doorknob did not turn, the door did not open, but I could feel her presence, heavy and magnetic, crossing the physical barrier. I remained motionless, petrified under the Egyptian sheets, until I heard the steps move away again toward the opposite wing of the house. In that moment, I understood that there would be no real privacy in that golden cage, that I would always be under the optics of that controlling woman. The baby did not even exist physically inside me yet, but I already felt that we were hostages of an obsession I did not fully understand. The early morning advanced, and I finally fell asleep from exhaustion, dreaming of black eyes and red lips that devoured me whole. I woke up startled with the sunlight invading the room through the curtains I had forgotten to close, illuminating my new reality. The day was clear and beautiful outside, but inside me there was a storm forming, a mixture of fear and fascination for the owner of that house. I got up and went to the window, observing the impeccable garden down below. and saw Catherine swimming in the pool, cutting the water with perfect and vigorous strokes. She wore a sleek black swimsuit and swam with military discipline, going back and forth without stopping to breathe, like an inexhaustible machine. I was hypnotized watching her body move in the water, the strength of the back muscles, the determination in every repetitive movement. It was a beautiful and frightening sight, proof that she controlled everything around her, including her own physical exhaustion. I knew I would have to go down and face that hurricane again, put on the mask of gratitude, and begin my job of being the perfect pregnant woman. I took a deep breath, feeling the smell of cleanliness in the room, and placed my hand on my still flat belly, making a silent promise to the child who would come. I would endure the rules, the silence, and Catherine's cold gaze, because I had no other way out, and because, deep down, I wanted to unravel her mystery. That woman was an enigma locked under 7 keys, inside an ice castle, and I had just moved into the throne room. The forced cohabitation was just beginning, and I felt that the white walls of that mansion would see things no contract could predict. The game had started, and I was the most fragile piece on Catherine's chessboard. The alarm clock didn't need to ring that morning, as my body was already alert long before sunrise, tense with the expectation of the first day in my new invented position. In the illuminated closet, I found a separate rack with clothes Catherine had ordered for me, tailored pieces in pastel and neutral tones that shouted sophistication and discretion. I put on a sand-colored silk blouse and dress pants that fit perfectly, feeling like a child playing dress-up in her rich mother's clothes, an imposter about to step onto a stage for a demanding audience. Looking in the mirror, I saw a polished version of Julia, a woman who seemed to belong to that world of marble and glass, but my eyes still carried the fear of the girl from the wrong side of the tracks who owed rent. I went down for breakfast, where I found only a glass of green juice and a list of vitamins next to my plate. The first reminder of the day that my body was a project under strict management. The commute to the company was silent, with Catherine typing furiously on her tablet beside me on the leather seat of the armored car, completely ignoring my nervous presence. When we arrived at the lobby of Lumiere, the atmosphere changed. Employees straightened their posture and conversations ceased as she passed, parting the way like an icebreaker in a frozen sea. I was introduced as the new assistant director, a distant cousin who was coming to add value, and I saw in the staff's eyes a mix of curiosity and suspicion about the girl who appeared out of nowhere beside the Empress. Catherine installed me at an elegant desk in the antechamber of her office, a strategic position where she could watch me through the slightly open blinds, controlling both my work and my pregnancy. My initial tasks were bureaucratic, organizing schedules, filtering emails, and reading endless reports on market trends and new aesthetic procedures. I expected to be treated like fluff, someone who was there just to fill a seat. But Catherine was a demanding boss who did not tolerate mediocrity, not even from her surrogate. She demanded efficiency, speed, and precision from me, correcting my mistakes with a brutal frankness that made my cheeks burn with shame and frustration. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to balance the gratitude I owed her with the desire to cry in the bathroom with every look of disapproval I received through the glass. However, there was something fascinating about watching her work. The way she commanded that empire with sharp intelligence and a frightening photographic memory. Near noon, a crisis broke out. A major supplier of imported ingredients had canceled delivery, threatening to paralyze a whole week's treatments at the clinic. Catherine's office turned into controlled chaos, with phones ringing and directors entering and leaving with expressions of panic, while she tried to negotiate in Tsawat and Thritadi, different languages. From my desk, I remembered an old email I read during the morning screening, from a smaller supplier who had been trying to schedule a meeting for months, offering exactly the same product with immediate delivery. I hesitated for a second, afraid to interrupt. But the desperation in her voice gave me the courage to enter the room and place the tablet with the contact in front of her. whispering the solution. Catherine stopped in the middle of a sentence, looked at the tablet, then at me, and her black eyes sparked with genuine surprise, as if she had just discovered that the incubator had a brain too. She made the call immediately, solved the problem in 10 minutes, and upon hanging up, let the air out of her lungs with relief that slightly disarmed her rigid posture. "Good job, Julia," she said, without smiling. But the tone of voice had a nuance of respect I had never heard before, an acknowledgement that I could be useful beyond biology. That dry compliment was like water in the desert, feeding my self-esteem and making me feel, for the first time, that I could actually occupy that chair without being a complete fraud. Lunch was served at my desk, a balanced gourmet meal sent by the house nutritionist, while Catherine had lunch at an external meeting, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the view of the city. I began to feel a strange tiredness in the middle of the afternoon, exhaustion that weighed on my eyelids and made my body slow, the first physical sign that something was changing inside me. I tried to disguise it, drinking cold water and keeping myself busy, terrified of seeming weak or unfit in the eyes of my perfectionist cousin. When she returned, she noticed my paleness immediately, her control radar activating as soon as she crossed the door, and asked if I had taken the afternoon supplements. It wasn't concern for me, I knew. It was concern for the company asset. But even so, I felt a strange comfort seeing that someone was paying attention to my well-being, even if for selfish reasons. She dismissed me early, ordering the driver to take me home to rest, while she would stay late resolving pending issues. Leaving the building before her made me feel guilty, but my body thanked me when I sank into the car seat, closing my eyes and letting the city pass by like a blur. Arriving at the empty and silent mansion was a thermal shock. The house was beautiful, but without Catherine's electric energy, it seemed like an abandoned museum waiting for visitors who never arrived. Matilda served me dinner early, and I ate mechanically, missing the noise of the television and the loud conversations of the neighbors in my old neighborhood. I went up to the room and took a long shower, smoothing my belly in the mirror, looking for any sign of change, any new curve indicating the presence of the life I had sold. There was still nothing visible, just my soft skin and the scar from a bicycle fall in childhood, marks of a story that now seemed to belong to someone else. I lay on the immense bed, feeling loneliness embrace my shoulders, and stayed imagining Catherine alone in that huge office, surrounded by power and money, but with no one to share the weight of the day. I heard her car arrive late at night, the sound of tires on gravel breaking the silence of the early morning, and my heart raced involuntarily, a Pavlovian reaction to her presence. I stayed listening to her steps going up the stairs, hoping she would go straight to her room, but the steps stopped again at my door, just like the night before. This time, however, there was a light knock, almost hesitant, and before I could answer, the door opened, revealing Catherine still dressed in work clothes, looking exhausted. She entered the room, invading my personal space, bringing with her the smell of the street and her expensive perfume, and stopped at the foot of the bed, observing me with an unreadable expression. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked, her voice hoarse with fatigue, crossing her arms as if to protect herself from the intimacy of that nocturnal moment. I answered yes, that it was just tiredness. And she nodded slowly, her eyes scanning my makeup-free face and my simple cotton pajamas. "You were sharp in the meeting today. That supplier saved our week," she admitted, the words coming out with difficulty, as if praising hurt her pride physically. I smiled shyly, feeling heat rise through my chest, and saw her eyes fix on my mouth for a second, before quickly looking away to the wall. The silence that formed between us wasn't cold like before. It was charged, electric, full of unsaid things hovering in the room's air conditioning. Catherine seemed to want to say something else, or maybe do something, as her hands gripped her own arms tightly, knuckles white with tension. "Rest. The doctor is coming tomorrow morning for the first official ultrasound," she said abruptly, spinning on her heels and leaving the room as fast as she entered, closing the door with a soft click. I stared at the closed wood, feeling my heart beat out of rhythm, confused by that nocturnal visit that seemed to have broken an invisible barrier between mistress and maid. I fell asleep thinking about those black eyes and the vulnerability I thought I had seen in them, a crack in the armor of the Iron Woman that left me intrigued and strangely attracted. I was starting to admire her strength, her obsessive dedication, and that was dangerous, very dangerous for someone who had signed a contract prohibiting emotional bonds. The next day would bring the first image of the baby, the concretization of our agreement, and I knew that moment would change everything again. I was no longer just the poor cousin. I was her partner in that life project. And the line separating the professional from the personal was starting to get dangerously blurred in that silent house. The exam room was in the shadows, lit only by the bluish glow of the monitors humming softly, creating an atmosphere that seemed suspended in time and space. I was lying on the narrow stretcher, feeling the disposable paper brush against my bare back, exposed and vulnerable like an offering at an altar of medical technology. Catherine remained standing beside me, but kept a safe distance, arms crossed over her chest in a defensive gesture, dressed in her usual armor of impeccable tailoring. The doctor, a gray-haired man who spoke softly and moved calmly, adjusted the ultrasound machine with the reverence of someone handling a sacred relic, aware that the woman paying his salary demanded absolute perfection. The smell of alcohol and cleanliness was strong, but underneath it, I could still smell my cousin's sandalwood perfume, an olfactory anchor in that sea of sterility. When the doctor announced he would apply the conductive gel, I held my breath involuntarily, waiting for the thermal shock on my sensitive skin. The cold liquid touched my lower belly and I shivered, my muscles contracting in reflex, causing Catherine to take a subtle step toward me, almost instinctive, before restraining herself and returning to the rigid posture. She watched the monitor screen with ferocious intensity, her black eyes scanning the initial static in search of confirmation of her investment, proof that her plan was working. I felt strangely dissociated from my own body, as if that belly being examined didn't belong to me, was just rented land where she was building her happiness. The silence in the room was so dense, I could hear the sound of my own accelerated breathing, betraying the nervousness I tried to hide. The doctor slid the transducer over my skin, pressing lightly, and black and white images began to dance on the screen, abstract shapes that meant nothing to me. Catherine, however, leaned forward, the mask of coldness starting to crack. Her red lips parted in a silent expectation that humanized her stern face. She didn't look at me, didn't hold my hand to give me comfort. All her attention was focused on the pixels drawing the future she bought. I felt alone on that stretcher, a spectator of the most important moment of her life, carrying the weight of the responsibility to generate that dream. It was then that the doctor smiled behind the surgical mask and turned a knob on the panel, announcing we were going to hear the heart. The sound invaded the room suddenly, loud and fast, a rhythmic and powerful gallop that echoed off the white walls like a thunder of life. Thump, 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 thump. That noise filled every empty corner of my being, a sonic and undeniable proof that there was another life existing inside me, depending on my body to survive. My eyes filled with tears instantly, a biological and emotional reaction I couldn't control, the reality of pregnancy hitting me with the force of a tidal wave. I turned my face to the side, ashamed to cry in front of the Iron Lady. But what I saw made me forget my own emotion. Catherine was paralyzed, hands gripping her own arm so hard her knuckles were white, and her unshakable executive posture had completely crumbled. Her black eyes, always so hard and analytical, were glazed on the screen, shining with moisture she would never allow in a business meeting. I saw a solitary tear escape and run down her porcelain cheek, a shiny trail of vulnerability she didn't bother to wipe away immediately. In that second, under the blue light of the monitor and to the sound of the baby's accelerated heart, she wasn't the aesthetics tycoon, the rich cousin, or the feared boss. She was just a woman facing a miracle money couldn't manufacture. Her loneliness was exposed, raw and painful, revealing the immense void that small sound was starting to fill. I wanted to reach out and touch her arm, to share that moment, but the fear of breaking the spell kept me motionless. "She is perfect," said the doctor, referring to the embryo, and his voice seemed to bring Catherine back to reality with a start. She blinked rapidly, wiping the tear with a discreet and elegant movement of her hand, recomposing her posture with frightening speed, putting the ice armor back on. "Yes, of course she is," she replied, her voice trembling slightly only on the first syllable before recovering the usual firmness of someone who never accepts less than excellence. She looked at me for the first time since the exam began, and there was something new in her look. It wasn't affection, but it was recognition, validation that I carried her treasure. That look lasted only a second, but it was enough to create an invisible bond between us, a complicity forged in the sound of that heartbeat. The doctor wiped the gel from my belly with a paper towel, and the cold of the absence of the transducer was replaced by a strange feeling of emptiness, now that the heart sound had ceased. I sat up on the stretcher, adjusting my clothes with slow gestures, feeling dizzy from the rush of adrenaline and emotion. Catherine was already at the door, talking to the secretary about the next appointments, acting as if the moment of weakness had never existed. But I knew what I had seen. She requested the printout of the first ultrasound image and put it in her designer bag with extreme care, as if it were a confidential document of inestimable value. We left the clinic in silence, but the air between us seemed to have changed. It was heavier, loaded with an unspoken intimacy. In the car, the silence continued, but this time Catherine didn't grab the tablet to work, nor did she make urgent calls to the company. She stayed looking out the tinted window, watching the city pass, with her hand resting on the bag where the photo was, in an unconscious protective gesture. I looked at her sideways, seeing the reflection of her profile in the glass, and realized that the invincible woman had a weak point, and that weak point was growing inside me. The realization gave me a certain power, but also increased my fear. Now I wasn't just carrying a fetus, I was carrying the hope of the most demanding woman I knew. The driver drove smoothly, taking us back to the mansion, which, I suspected, would seem a little less cold that night. We arrived home and dinner was served, the usual routine. But Catherine seemed distracted, her eyes lost somewhere beyond the dining table. She dismissed the staff early, which was unusual, and only the two of us remained in the huge room, with the sound of the wind beating on the glass windows. "Julia," she called me, and I raised my eyes from my plate, expecting some new rule or criticism about my posture. "Thank you," she said, a simple word that sounded strange in her mouth, loaded with a weight I didn't expect. She didn't explain what she was thanking me for, if it was for the exam, the pregnancy, or my discretion about her tear, and I just nodded, not knowing how to answer. She got up and went to the crystal bar, pouring herself a small glass of whiskey, breaking her own rule of not drinking during the week. She stood there, with her back to me, observing the illuminated garden, a solitary and powerful silhouette against the dark night. I finished my dinner, feeling a crazy urge to go over there and hug her, to say she didn't need to be strong all the time. But I remembered the contract, the distancing clauses. I went up to my room with the image of that tear etched in my mind, proof that there was a heart beating beneath those designer clothes. I lay in bed and placed my hand on my belly, feeling a new connection, not just with the baby, but with his mother. The early morning came silent, and I woke up thirsty, going down to the kitchen on tiptoes so as not to wake anyone. Passing by the living room, I saw a faint light coming from the sofa and realized Catherine was there, sitting in the dark, illuminated only by the cell phone screen. She wasn't working. She was looking at the ultrasound photo she had taken out of her bag, running her finger lightly over the grainy black and white image. I froze in the shadow of the stairs, observing the forbidden scene. The Ice Queen stripped of her armor, adoring the blur that represented her future child. She sighed, a deep and tired sound, and held the photo against her chest, closing her eyes as if saying a silent prayer. I went back to the room without making a noise, heart racing and a new certainty burning in my chest. That pregnancy wasn't just a business deal. I was generating the only thing that could save Catherine from that golden loneliness, and that scared me because I was starting to want to save her too. The line between the surrogate and the woman in love was getting thinner and thinner, and I knew that, sooner or later, I would cross that dangerous border. The sound of that little heart beating had changed everything, transforming a cold contract into a promise of life. And I, Julia, was in the center of this emotional hurricane, not knowing if I would come out of it whole or with a broken heart. The months advanced with the slow drag of someone who counts time by the inches of the waist and not by the hours of the clock. My belly, once flat and discreet, began to emerge like a small crescent moon, a smooth and firm curve announcing to the world the secret I carried. Catherine observed this transformation with a mixture of fascination and extreme vigilance, as if my body were a building under construction, needing daily inspection to avoid structural failures. She monitored my diet with military rigor, strictly forbade me from carrying any weight, and turned up her nose at clothes that squeezed my expanding silhouette. But her biggest obsession, worthy of the owner of a beauty empire, was the skin. She was terrified of stretch marks, treating the possibility of a permanent mark as if it were an unbailable crime against the perfect aesthetic of her project. On a stuffy Tuesday night, I was in my room trying to read a book I could barely concentrate on, when the door opened without warning, revealing Catherine with a velvet box in her hands. She wore a wine-colored silk robe that showed off her pale and elegant neckline, and her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders in a calculated disorder that made her even more beautiful. "I brought this for you," she said, placing the box on the bed carefully, opening the lid to reveal amber glass bottles with labels in French. "They are pure essential oils, developed in my laboratory in Paris," she explained, with the professorial tone of someone presenting a rare jewel and not a cosmetic. "From today on, hydration must be intensive and done correctly to ensure fiber elasticity," she decreed, sitting on the edge of the bed with a naturalness that surprised me. I picked up one of the bottles, feeling the weight of the cold glass, and started to unscrew the cap, ready to apply the product myself and end that nocturnal inspection quickly. "That is not how it is done," she interrupted immediately, holding my wrist firmly, her long fingers wrapping around my skin with possessive pressure. "You will apply it in a hurry, and forget the side areas," she said, taking the bottle from my hand and dripping a few drops of the golden liquid into the palm of her own hand. "Lift your blouse," Catherine ordered, and her voice did not have the tone of a request, but rather the soft and unquestionable command of someone accustomed to being obeyed by hundreds of employees. I hesitated for a second, feeling the heat rise up my neck, but I obeyed, pulling the cotton fabric up and exposing my naked and round belly under the yellow light of the lamp. Catherine warmed the oil by rubbing one hand against the other, a soft sound of skin against skin that filled the silence of the room, spreading an intoxicating aroma of sweet almonds and wild roses. When she finally touched my belly, I held my breath. Her hands, although warmed by friction, still carried that natural coolness that contrasted violently with the fever burning in me. The touch started clinically, circular and technical movements covering every inch of stretched skin, as if she were polishing a valuable sculpture. She did not look at my face. Her black eyes were fixed on the task, concentrated on the product absorption, analyzing the texture of my dermis with the rigor of a scientist. I tried to keep my breathing regular, looking at the ceiling, counting the crystals of the chandelier so as not to focus on the overwhelming sensation of those hands traveling across my womb. Gradually, however, the rhythm of the massage changed, losing the haste and mechanical precision to gain a dangerous and enveloping slowness. The circles became wider. Her fingers glided with less pressure and more sensitivity, contouring the navel, going down the sides to the limit of my pants elastic. The silence in the room changed texture, ceasing to be embarrassing to become electric, charged with palpable tension that made the air seem denser and difficult to breathe. I dared to lower my eyes and saw that Catherine no longer had that analytical boss expression. Her face was soft, lips parted, and she observed her own hands on my skin with almost childlike curiosity. It seemed she was discovering, through touch, the reality of the life pulsating in there, feeling the human warmth lacking in her marble existence. "The skin is responding well," she murmured, her voice coming out hoarse and low, as if talking to herself and not to me. She continued the movements, and I felt a shiver run down my spine when her thumb grazed the base of my rib, in a place that had nothing to do with stretch marks or pregnancy. It was a touch of intimacy, a caress disguised as aesthetic treatment, and my body reacted involuntarily, my belly hardening under her hand in a contraction of pleasure and fear. Catherine stopped the movement for an instant, feeling my musculature react, and raised her eyes slowly until meeting mine. The shock of visual contact was so intense I felt vertigo. In those black wells, I saw confused desire, a hunger for connection she fought desperately to repress. We stayed like that for a time that seemed eternal, her with oily hands on my womb, me half naked in bed, trapped in a time bubble where contract rules didn't exist. I could see the tiny details of her face, the perfect skin texture, the long eyelashes projecting shadows on her cheekbones, her breathing now subtly altered. I wanted her to continue, wanted those hands to go up, for her to touch me not as the hired pregnant woman, but as the woman Julia. Desire was a crazy and forbidden thing blooming in the middle of that commercial agreement, fed by the loneliness of us both and the forced proximity of those months. I saw doubt pass through her eyes, the internal battle between the cold reason of the businesswoman and the instinct of the lonely woman. Suddenly, the baby moved, a strong and clear kick against the palm of her hand, breaking the hypnotic trance we were plunged into. Catherine gasped, withdrawing her hands as if she had taken an electric shock, eyes wide with surprise and wonder. He moved, she whispered, looking at her own hand as if it had been blessed or cursed in that instant. "Yes, he moves a lot at this time," I replied, my voice trembling, trying to normalize the situation, but my heart beat so hard I was sure she could hear. She looked back at my belly, but didn't touch it anymore, keeping her hands suspended in the air, hesitant, as if afraid to break the miracle or get addicted to that feeling of life. "I'll leave the bottle here," she said abruptly, getting up from the bed in a sudden and clumsy movement that didn't match her usual elegance. She wiped her hands on a linen towel she brought with her, rubbing the skin hard, as if wanting to erase the trace of our contact, proof of the emotional crime we almost committed. "Continue applying every night, without fail," she ordered, recovering the command voice, but without being able to look in my eyes again. She walked to the door with quick steps, the silk of the robe floating behind her like a superhero cape in flight. "Good night, Julia," she threw over her shoulder, closing the door before I could answer, leaving behind only the sweet smell of the oil and my confusion. I was left alone in the room, belly still shining under the lamplight, feeling the warm trail where her hands had been. I ran my own hand over the spot, trying to recapture the feeling, but it wasn't the same. The electricity, the danger, The strange magic that happened when Catherine let her guard down was missing. That moment had changed something fundamental between us, transforming the power dynamic into something much more complex and frightening. She no longer saw just a rented uterus. She had felt life, had touched my skin and liked it, and that terrified her as much as it excited me. I knew she would try to pull away in the coming days, build higher walls to protect herself. But now I knew there was a door in that wall. I turned off the light and lay in the darkness, feeling the baby kick again, as if he too was agitated by the proximity of mother. The smell of almonds impregnated the sheets, transforming my bed into a sanctuary of her presence, and I allowed myself to imagine for an insane second what it would be like if those hands touched me for love and not obligation. I was walking on a very thin line, and the fall would be fatal, but the adrenaline of being near her was addictive. Catherine was a cold fire that burned without consuming, and I, like a foolish moth, was flying straight into the flame, attracted by the promise of warmth I saw deep in those black eyes. The ritual of the oils was over, but the mark it left on my soul wouldn't wash off with soap and water. 2 days after that night with the oils, when the silence between us was still thick and loaded with unresolved electric tension, Catherine entered my room holding a black garment bag. "Tonight is the Foundation's annual gala," she announced, placing the piece on the armchair with the naturalness of someone stating the weather forecast. I knew that event was the highlight of the city's social calendar, a parade of vanities where the elite displayed their fortunes and secrets. But I never imagined I would be part of it. "You are coming with me," she completed, seeing my astonishment, and explained that my presence was necessary to end the malicious rumors about her disappearance from social life and present the pregnant cousin as a consummated and proud fact. It wasn't an invitation. It was a strategic summons to a battle of public image where I would be her shield and flag. When I unzipped the bag, the dress slid out like a waterfall of navy blue silk, a deep and elegant shade reminiscent of the sea at night. Contrary to what I expected, the cut didn't try to hide my pregnancy with wide, shapeless fabrics. On the contrary, it was a tight model that embraced every curve, designed to show off the 6-month belly like a trophy. Putting it on, I felt the cold fabric mold to my transformed body, and when I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the Julia from the rough neighborhood. The makeup artist Catherine hired highlighted my eyes and left my freckles visible, creating an image of natural and maternal beauty contrasting with the artifice of that plastic world. I looked stunning, but felt like an imposter dressed as a queen, about to enter a court where everyone would be judges. Catherine was waiting for me in the entrance hall, and when I came down the stairs, she stopped checking her cell phone and looked me up and down, lingering on the curve of my womb. She wore a black velvet dress with a back neckline that was, at the same time, conservative and extremely sensual, and her red lips were the only color in her monochromatic figure. "You look appropriate," she said, a contained compliment that, coming from her, was worth more than 1,000 exaggerated adjectives. She approached and fixed a loose strand of my hair, an intimate gesture that lasted only a second, but served to remind me of the oil night and the barrier we had almost crossed. "Let's go. The sharks are hungry," she murmured, offering me her arm not as gallant support, but as an anchor so I wouldn't get lost in the coming storm. Arrival at the event was a bombardment of flashes that left me momentarily blind, a wall of white lights popping frantically as we got out of the car. Catherine walked with the posture of an empress, chin up and gaze focused on the horizon, ignoring questions shouted by reporters about her personal life. I kept myself glued to her, feeling the heat of her body through the thin fabric of my dress, absorbing the strength she radiated. We entered the ballroom, a gigantic space decorated with thousands of white roses and crystals, where the smell of expensive perfumes mixed with the aroma of champagne and hypocrisy. Conversation ceased for a brief moment when we passed through the door, and I felt hundreds of eyes fix on my belly, judging, calculating, and gossiping. Catherine guided me through the crowd with a firm hand on my back, introducing me as her cousin and assistant director, challenging anyone to question the truth of that story. Women smiled with gritted teeth, praising my maternal aura, while casting envious glances at Catherine's perfect skin. Men, in their expensive tuxedos, treated the pregnancy as an exotic curiosity, something primitive invading the civilized ballroom. I smiled until my cheeks hurt, repeating the memorized phrases we had rehearsed, feeling like a ventriloquist's dummy in her skillful hands. But despite the discomfort, I felt strangely protected. Catherine didn't leave me alone for a second, silently growling at anyone who got too close. It was then that he appeared, a tall man with graying hair and an oily smile, an old competitor Catherine despised, named Robert. He approached with a glass of whiskey in hand, the smell of alcohol and tobacco arriving before him, and looked at my belly with barely disguised disdain. "Catherine, my dear, I see you decided to outsource motherhood," he said loud enough for the circle of people around to hear. He laughed at his own joke, suggesting I was just a luxury incubator rented to preserve the tycoon's body, reducing my existence and the babies to a vulgar commercial transaction. The silence that formed around us was embarrassing, and I felt my face burn with shame, tears pricking my eyes at that public humiliation. I expected Catherine to ignore it, to use her icy elegance to change the subject and leave, as she always did in unpleasant situations. But she didn't move. On the contrary, she let go of my arm and took a step toward Robert, invading his personal space with contained fury that made the temperature around us drop 10 degrees. His smile faltered when he saw the darkness in her eyes, a promise of verbal violence that would make anyone tremble. "Motherhood is not a service, Robert. It is a gift that small men like you will never understand," she said, voice low, but sharp as a scalpel blade. "And for your information," she continued, raising her tone just enough for everyone to hear clearly, "Julia is not an outsourced employee. She is my family, carries my blood and the future of my legacy, and any disrespect to her is a direct declaration of war against me." Catherine placed her hand on my waist, in a possessive and protective gesture, claiming not just the baby, but me, before the entire city elite. She pulled me close, gluing our bodies, and challenged the whole room with her look, a lioness defending her cubs against hyenas. Robert stammered a lame excuse and retreated, disappearing into the crowd like a scared rat, while the other guests went back to talking hurriedly, feigning normality. My heart beat out of rhythm, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of being defended with such passion by that woman I thought was made of ice. I looked at Catherine, and saw she was still trembling slightly, not from cold, but from the anger she had just released. She turned to me and, for an instant, the mask fell again. She examined my face looking for signs of crying, worried if his words had hurt me. "Are you okay?" she asked, completely ignoring the important people around. I nodded, unable to speak, too moved by the ferocity of that protection I had never had from anyone in my life. "Let's go," she decided abruptly, not caring that dinner hadn't been served yet, or that it was too early for the hostess to leave. She took my hand, interlacing our fingers in a way that went far beyond social protocol, and guided me out of the hall with head held high. We walked through the lobby hand in hand, and I felt an electric current pass from her palm to mine, a connection sealing a silent pact. We were together against the world. In the car, the driver turned on the heater and departed smoothly, leaving behind the lights and noise of the party. We stayed silent for a few minutes, watching the city lights pass by the window, each lost in her own thoughts. "Thank you," I whispered finally in the dim light of the back seat, looking at her profile illuminated by street lamps. Catherine turned her face to me, and the hardness of her eyes had transformed into soft tiredness. "They know nothing about us," she said, and the use of "us" made my stomach do a somersault. She didn't say about me, or about the contract. She included us in the same equation, on the same side of the trench. She reached out, and in a gesture that seemed involuntary, touched my knee, a brief and hesitant touch that burned through the dress fabric. "I cannot stand them talking about you as if you were less than you are," she confessed, voice hoarse, revealing vulnerability that disarmed me completely. In that moment, in the dark of that luxurious car, I realized that what we felt wasn't just gratitude or duty. The public defense wasn't just to save the company's reputation. It was personal. It was visceral. It was the kind of attitude only someone who cares deeply would take. We arrived home, and the silence of the mansion welcomed us, but now it didn't seem empty anymore. We went up the stairs together, stopping in the hallway separating our rooms, that physical space seeming smaller every day. Catherine looked me in the eyes, and the tension of the almost kiss from the oil night returned with full force, hovering in the air. "Good night, Julia," she said, voice soft, without the usual coldness. "Good night, Catherine," I replied, watching her enter her room. I leaned against my closed door, smiling like a fool, with absolute certainty that the Iron Woman was starting to melt, and that I was hopelessly in love with my savior. I woke up suddenly at 3 in the morning, not from a nightmare or belly discomfort, but from overwhelming and specific hunger that seemed to corrode my stomach. It wasn't a desire to eat just anything. My body demanded, with the urgency of a medical emergency, a grilled cheese sandwich with plenty of butter, something greasy and forbidden in the house's strict diet. I tried to ignore it, turning to the other side and pulling the duvet up to my neck. But the image of melting cheese danced in my mind, making it impossible to go back to sleep. Resigned, I put on my slippers and left the room on tiptoes, praying the wooden floor wouldn't creak and wake the beast sleeping at the end of the hall. The house was immersed in deep silence, early morning shadows transforming designer furniture into mysterious silhouettes. Descending the spiral stairs, I noticed a faint light coming from the kitchen, a yellow slit cutting the darkness of the ground floor. My heart sped up with fear of being caught raiding the fridge, violating sacred nutritional rules, but hunger was greater than fear of a scolding. I pushed the swinging door slowly and encountered a scene my brain took a few seconds to process. Catherine was there, leaning against the central marble island, still dressed in the wine silk robe, staring at a chrome toaster as if it were a complex nuclear engineering enigma. She held a package of whole wheat bread in one hand and a knife in the other, with an expression of absolute concentration I only saw when she analyzed million-dollar contracts. "Julia?" she asked upon seeing me, startled, almost dropping the knife on the counter, losing her unshakable posture for a second. I explained, stammering a bit, about the uncontrollable craving and hunger not letting me sleep, expecting a reprimand about schedules and calories. To my surprise, her shoulders relaxed and a half smile, tired but genuine, appeared on her lipstick-free lips. "I couldn't sleep either. The adrenaline from the party hasn't gone down," she confessed, putting the bread package aside and crossing her arms. "Sit down, I'll make it for you," she offered, and I widened my eyes, because imagining Catherine, the owner of the Lumiere Empire, operating a stove was as unlikely as seeing snow in the desert. I sat on one of the high stools, fascinated, watching that powerful woman fumble with cold butter and bread that insisted on tearing. She moved in the kitchen with captivating clumsiness, trying to apply the same surgical precision she used in the company to a simple domestic task she clearly didn't master. She turned on the griddle, but missed the knob twice before getting the flame right, letting out a low and elegant curse word that made me bite my lip not to laugh. The smell of butter sizzling in the pan soon filled the sterile environment, a homemade and comforting aroma that seemed not to belong to that magazine mansion. Catherine watched the sandwich with the intensity of someone watching the stock market, flipping the bread with a silver spatula, tense with the possibility of burning the midnight snack. When she finally placed the plate in front of me, the sandwich was far from the aesthetic perfection she prized so much. One side was more toasted than the other, and cheese leaked disorderly from the edges. "Voila," she said, with light irony, pouring herself a glass of almond milk and leaning on the counter in front of me to watch me eat. I took the first bite and closed my eyes, moaning softly with satisfaction. In that moment, that crooked bread made by the hands of the richest woman in the city was the best meal of my life. "It is terrible, isn't it?" she asked, interpreting my silence as criticism, furrowing her brow with concern. "It is perfect," I replied with my mouth full, laughing at her insecurity, and she let out a short laugh, a hoarse and wonderful sound I had never heard before. "I never learned to cook," she admitted, looking at her own impeccable hands. "I always had housekeepers, chefs, assistants. My life was built so I wouldn't waste time on basics." There was melancholy in that confession, the sadness of someone who conquered the world but skipped the simple and human stages of existence, like making their own breakfast. I always had to be the provider, the leader, the rock. No one ever took care of me, and I never had time to take care of anyone in this simple way, she continued, voice lowering until becoming a confidential whisper. I finished the sandwich, wiping my fingers on a paper napkin, feeling my heart squeeze before that vulnerability exposed in the yellow kitchen light. "You are taking care of me now, Catherine, and you are doing a great job," I said, looking deep into her eyes, trying to convey all the gratitude I felt. She raised her gaze, and we stared at each other in the silence of the early morning, the barrier between mistress and maid completely dissolved by the smell of cheese and the intimacy of the moment. She walked around the marble island and stopped beside me, close enough for me to feel the heat of her body and the soft perfume of someone who just got out of bed. She reached out and, with trembling delicacy, wiped a crumb from the corner of my mouth. The touch of her fingers on my lips was electric, making my whole body react, blood running faster in veins, sleep completely forgotten. Catherine didn't withdraw her hand immediately. She let her fingers trace the line of my jaw, her black eyes fixed on my mouth with hunger having nothing to do with food. I held my breath, motionless, desperately wishing she would break the last rule, that she would lean in those few inches separating us. The air became heavy, charged with desire and fear, a silent conflict between what we wanted and what we could do. "You bring color to this house, Julia," she whispered, and the phrase sounded like a declaration of love, more intimate than any cliché. "I love you." Before I arrived, everything here was white, gray, and silent. Now there is the smell of food, there is music, there is life, she completed, seeming scared by her own realization. I brought my hand to her face, covering the hand she kept on my cheek, and felt she was trembling slightly. "I am not leaving, Catherine," I promised on impulse, without thinking about the contract saying otherwise, without thinking about the future, just wanting to calm the fear I saw in her eyes. For an instant, it seemed she was going to surrender. Her face came closer to mine, eyelids heavy, lips parting in a silent invitation. I closed my eyes, waiting for contact, feeling anticipation burn on my skin, the perfect moment suspended in time. But then, a boom outside made windows vibrate, violent thunder announcing the arrival of the storm brewing over the city. Catherine pulled away with a start, withdrawing her hand as if burned, the magic of the moment broken by nature's noise. She blinked, confused, as if waking from a trance, and the control mask began to recompose, although there were still visible cracks. "It is late. You need to rest. The baby needs sleep," she said, voice returning to practical tone but failing slightly on the last word. She took my empty plate and put it in the sink with the abrupt movement, turning her back to me to hide the turbulence on her face. I got off the stool, feeling my legs shaky, frustration and desire mixed in a knot in my throat. "Good night, Catherine," I murmured, knowing insisting now would be useless, that she needed to hide again in her fortress. She just nodded without turning, rigid, while rain began to punish the kitchen window glass with violence. I went up the stairs listening to the storm sound increase, lightning illuminating the corridor with white and ghostly flashes. I lay in bed, but the feeling of her fingers on my mouth was still there, ghost of a kiss that didn't happen but changed everything. I knew she wouldn't sleep either, would be downstairs listening to the rain and fighting her own feelings. What happened in the kitchen couldn't be undone. She had cooked for me, had touched me, had confessed her loneliness. We were heading to a point of no return. Outside, wind howled and rain fell torrentially, as if the sky were crying our cowardice or celebrating our repressed passion. I curled up under covers, feeling a strange twinge in the womb, different from others, perhaps caused by stress or heavy food late at night. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the memory of Catherine's look. But the storm seemed to bring a bad omen. The comfort of that night was about to be tested, and the fragility of the life I carried would become, very soon, the center of a new despair. I fell asleep with the sound of thunder, not knowing the real danger wasn't in the rain outside, but in the fright my body would give me at dawn. But before telling how that early morning turned into the worst nightmare of our lives and put our baby's life at real risk, I need to pause to breathe. What happened in the following hours was so intense, painful, and decisive that it changed the history of our contract forever. If you, like me, are rooting for the two of us and want to know if love survived the tragedy that came next, check now if you are subscribed to the channel and have the bell activated. The continuation of this storm and the definitive trial by fire of our love is already on the way. Prepare your heart, because destiny was about to test us in the cruelest way possible.